From the Citizens Bank studio, welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show, where we celebrate every single day. So many amazing people across the state of Mississippi who are working so hard to make this such a wonderful place to live, work, and play. And boy, do we. So many great shows recently. And I say this a lot, but I really do appreciate it. The feedback we get has just been terrific. In fact, I tell you, the show that I had with Robbie D'Angelo, the human optimization coach. Robbie's joined me on a regular basis for about 4 years. But this last show, it touched a few more people than normal. I've received a lot of really positive feedback about how people get in slumps. And from time to time, they need to find their way out. And Robbie talks a lot about aligning sort of your mental framework with your physical goals so that you can find that place where you just generally feel good physically and mentally. And so I really appreciate the feedback we got on that show. If you missed it, you can go to the SuperTalk Mississippi or the SuperTalk Gulf Coast or to the Ricky Matthews Show Facebook page, or you can go to SuperTalk Mississippi to the YouTube page. And I really encourage you to watch it. There's a lot of really kind of basic feedback for you about how you might be able to get back on track. So really appreciate the feedback about that. You know, I talk on this show a lot about how Mississippi is such a diverse and special place, especially geographically. I mean, it's a geographically diverse place. And, you know, one of the things as a CEO, I often thought about this, how many regions are there really in Mississippi? Well, if you go study this, you'll find that some people say as many as 13. But I like to say there are 4. I'm just trying to simplify it, frankly. You've got sort of the Piney Woods section that is part of the core of Mississippi. And then in northeast Mississippi, you've got the hills. You've got the Mississippi Delta. It starts from just south of Memphis. It goes all the way down to Vicksburg. And then, of course, you have what I call here on the Gulf Coast, everyone in Mississippi's paradise on earth, coastal Mississippi. Those are the 4 regions as I think about them. And of course, I talk a lot about the Mississippi Delta. I love the Mississippi Delta. And listen, long before I had a place there, when I was visiting there and hunting there, I would often pass the blues marker on Money Road right outside of Greenwood that is around memorializing Robert Johnson. And I often wondered about Robert Johnson. Of course, I knew a little bit about him, but the more I learned about him, the more I dove deep into it. In fact, there's a really terrific documentary on Netflix about Robert Johnson. If you haven't seen it, I'd really encourage you to go see it. But anyway, it started kind of an exploration for me to really study more about what's happening in the blues scene. Who are these stalwarts in the blues history of Mississippi that really had an impact globally? I mean, again, we'll get to that in just a second. But I've really, really enjoyed thinking about that. And, you know, I've been around music all my life, played drums since I was in 5th grade. And I lean more toward jazz and blues, but I love all forms of music. And, of course, if you're a regular listener, you hear Steve Azar and I. You know, Steve, the music and cultural ambassador for the state of Mississippi, has In a Mississippi Minute here on SuperTalk. We talk a lot about it. I met a friend of his, though, about 3 years ago at the Mockingbird Songwriters Festival. And Wesley Smith, who's now currently the executive director for the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau, and he's on a bunch of different boards, and he's kind of a blues aficionado. He's kind of a historian in a way. He and I set up on this raised platform that they had, and we chatted. And I didn't forget my conversation with Wesley. But more recently, someone recommended that I have Wesley on the show, and I thought that's a great idea on the expanded Ricky Matthews Show, which today it goes to different markets, not just coastal Mississippi. I invited Wesley to join me today. We're going to talk about blues. I'm really interested in hearing his story as well. But without any further ado, let me welcome Wesley Smith to the Ricky Matthews Show. Wesley, how you doing?
I'm good, Ricky. Good morning. I appreciate you having me on.
Hey, listen, I didn't realize. I remember hearing one of the first times that you were on Steve's show. And more recently, y'all have done kind of a history series. And I really enjoy it. I actually listened to a couple of those in preparation for today. But you have really kind of found your place, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so. I really enjoy it. I listen to your show and of course know your sort of love affair with the coast and the Delta and music as well. So I know you're interested in this, and that makes me more excited to talk about it. It's better when you can banter back and forth. Steve and I think do a good deal of that, and I love that you kind of have this knowledge of it as well. Maybe we can do the same sort of thing.
Yeah, it will be fun. So we're going to take a step back and find out a little bit more about where you came from. I remember in your story, you were offered this opportunity once before and you turned it down, but then you looked at it a second time and decided to come here. But we'll tell that story. Tell them a little bit more about what you do now. What are you involved in these days?
Sure. So my day job, my 9 to 5, which is never 9 to 5, is executive director of I say it's the longest title in the state of Mississippi, the executive director of the Greenville, Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau. And if you're not familiar with that term, or CVBs, it's just your local tourism office. Ours is a countywide office. So what do we do? It's all economic development, but from a tourism side. My job at its essence is to figure out ways to come into my county and leave their money to help our taxpayers, right, to keep their taxes lower. And it also adds a quality of life, right, for our own citizens and for our visitors. And we are covered up with music and history of all kinds. We take it for granted wherever you live. It's just human nature. We take it for granted. But we live in one of the most fascinating states in the Union and places on earth. And so it's always fun to welcome, especially people from other parts of the world who often know more about our state than some of our own citizens, But that's what I do day to day. Boards, I've been on a number of boards. I'm a former president of the Mississippi Tourism Association, Mississippi Delta Tourism Association. I'm on the board of the Mississippi Blues, not Commission, the Mississippi Blues Foundation, the fundraising arm. And just a number of other things. Here locally, I'm on the board of the Greenville Arts Council and the E. Bass Cultural Arts Center. And as you know, I heard you and Steve talk about this. Steve and I co-produce a show for Viking Cruises, which has been huge for our area. And we can get into more into that if you want. But it has been fun and enlightening, fun for us. And I think great for Viking, great for their passengers. And I think we have enlightened some people who had maybe the teeniest idea of what they thought Mississippi is and was, and they leave with a different opinion. And that excites everybody that works on the show.
Yeah, you what a great way to kind of frame the conversation we can have. You know what? In all the conversations that I've had, it is clear to me that Mississippians, as a general rule, don't appreciate the incredible place in history Mississippi has, not just as it relates to blues, but rock and roll and country music and all of that.
Right.
That we don't appreciate, we take it for granted. And when people like Kingfish, for example, go over to Europe, how popular they are, and other blues musicians, I think about Cedric and others that go over to Europe and are incredibly popular, and they are from here. We don't take them for granted. That's a fascinating aspect of the story, isn't it?
Well, it is. They are. But again, that's human nature. Like I spent a decade in Memphis, covered up with great musicians, and Memphis takes it for granted. If you're on the coast, there are. This happens here. Tell me if it happens there. I know it does. We have a local museum that's been open 20 years, and somebody will go, well, I didn't know that existed. We have people coming from all over the world to see it, and people won't be aware. But we just take it. If you live somewhere and something's always available to you, you don't take advantage of it because you can always do it tomorrow. And that happens to our musicians. Either we know we can go see them, or we see them all the time, or we personally know them. But when they go elsewhere, it's a treat. So and they're often paid better, which is great for them. But sometimes they have to leave to be really appreciated,
Well, look, I had the opportunity to have a show with Bill Luckett. For people who don't know Bill Luckett, the former mayor of Clarksdale, he and his partner Morgan Freeman started the Ground Zero Blues Club. And as it turns out, Wesley, it may have been the last long form interview he did before he passed away. It was not long after we did the show that he died. And it was great. We had an hour-long conversation about, with his passion for the Mississippi Delta and the whole 9 yards. It was just special, very special. And of course, a couple of months later, he passed away, and it was just shocking that happened. But one of the things he said, that any given time that he would walk through the Ground Zero Blues Club. In fact, we're getting to the end of this segment. I don't want to have to cut that story off. So when we get back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Wesley Smith and talk about what I learned from Bill Luckett. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show for the Citizens Bank studio. I have my new friend, Wesley Smith, coming to us from the Delta today, and we're gonna tell his story here shortly. But we're also going to talk about the incredible evolution of blues in Mississippi. But I was telling a story about probably the last long form interview that Bill Luckett had. It was with me on this show. And he said that at any given time he walks into the Ground Zero Blues Club, and about 50% of the people who are in the bar, are eating in the restaurant, are not from America, and they're from all over the country. That's one of the great stories that you and I will tell here shortly about how intrigued international travelers are to come to the Mississippi Delta. That's an amazing evolution, isn't it?
It's crazy. I mean, it's always kind of shocking. I don't know why. I'm used to it. Before I moved back to Mississippi and the Delta, I worked for the Blues Foundation based out of Memphis and produced the International Blues Challenge, and at that time it was called the W.C. Handy Blues Awards. And then went to the for-profit side of the blues and worked on Beale Street. And we saw people from all over the world constantly. But a little bit, it always amazes me, that they have that people around the world have that level of interest in our story here, and we see it all the time. C. Ray used to say it. Rochelle would tell you now from Visit Mississippi. If we get visitors here, especially from overseas, they will come again and again and again. And ultimately, it almost works against us because they make personal friends. So they no longer stay in our hotels and maybe eat in our restaurants as much because they have friends. They're going to people's homes and cookouts and staying with them. But, the great thing of that, and Bill Luckett would have said this because he saw a lot of it in Clarksdale, they might ultimately become citizens of your area if they're that enraptured with it, and then taxpayers, and that's good for all of us.
I have a friend of mine who lives in Destin, and he's originally from New Orleans, and he married a girl from New Orleans, but they live over outside of Destin, and he travels internationally, and he's quite a personality. He loves music, and he goes to blues festivals literally around the world, and he meets people. And he has a lot of friends in Australia, a bunch of friends in Australia. And from time to time, they'll meet in the Delta. He'll drive up from Destin, and they'll fly into Memphis or Atlanta, wherever they fly into, and they'll meet there. But that's normal, as you pointed out. That's not abnormal to have that, because they really enjoy. They want to get as close to the root of it as they possibly can, and you see that a lot.
Ricky, let me. When I worked at the Blues Foundation, they're called blues societies. They're basically local clubs. They don't call them blues clubs because if you say blues club, you think of a nightclub, a place you would hear live music. So they call these local organizations of people blues societies, and they are literally all over the world. The Blues Foundation, based out of Memphis, has a great event. We've had a lot of Mississippi bands actually win it, which is surprising to nobody. But it's basically the largest battle of unsigned blues bands in the world. Well over 200. And to make it to the finals in Memphis, you have to be sponsored by your local or regional blues society. So there's no other music. I mean, they're jazz fans. They're fans of all kind of music. They're festivals. It's not organized to this degree that people have that level of interest and making that happen and preserving that culture. We would have bands come to IBC, as we called it for short, that could not speak English, but they could sing the blues in English. They had learned it phonetically from listening to record albums. Fascinating. From all over the world, you know.
Isn't that great? Just one other quick note about my conversation with Bill Luckett, and it was, we went into so many incredible areas, but he was especially proud. I mentioned Kingfish, Kriston Ingram, a few minutes ago, but he was especially proud of Kingfish because he was literally a product of the Delta Blues Museum and the education program there. And one of the things that he was very focused on, and I hope that this continues. I have a sense that that this will continue, but sort of matching the historic blues figures with younger people so that this art could be passed on. And he talked a lot about the generational passing of the torch. Man, that's really important, isn't it, Wesley?
It is, and we all need to be statewide doing more of that. Arts education gets cut. Everybody's on a budget. You got to cut somewhere, but we need to find, especially in Mississippi, new and creative ways to make sure. I mean, we have such a legacy of great musicians, and now, and Steve and I talk about this sometimes on his show. You don't have to make it as a famous. Well, first of all, the record companies have consolidated, but there's so many more ways you can get your music out there through streaming and whatnot. And there are so many ways now you can make a good living in different facets of the music industry through technology. And we need to be showing the kids this. Steve and I talk about, I'm trying to get him to, let's start some more programs similar to what they had in Clarksdale. That was such a success,
It's amazing, man. You think about the impact. Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan and Keith Richards and Robert Plant, and the list goes on and on. I mean, it's just incredible, the impact. And we'll lean on this a bit in the next segment. But when we think about Robert Johnson and the impact he had long after he died, it's just incredible. It's incredible to see that. But let's take a step back for a second. You've mentioned Memphis a couple of times, but where did you grow up, Wesley?
I grew up in Greenwood, so in Greenville now, but the hill side of the Delta as opposed to the riverside.
Yeah,
and loved it. I was never one of those kids that was just dying to get out of Mississippi. I loved it from a kid. I have great memories of growing up. We used to jump off the Tallahatchie Bridge, if you want to bring it back to music, in the summers and play. We spent a lot of time on Muddy Road in our wayward young years before we knew that the current Robert Johnson grave that is most likely his grave, that I believe to be his grave. The other two were already sort of out there publicly, but not that one. We used to drink beer in that parking lot as teenagers, So there's just so much history, and when you start looking to it, it can get sort of addictive. My dad, Ricky, when I was growing up, had a '62 Dodge Dart, and had an 8-track player in it. And sort of my love affair for Mississippi music, what got me delving into it, was he had an old Jimmy Reed 8-track, and we wore it out. Going back to Dunleith, we were talking about meeting at the Dunleith Gin at Mockingbird. Jimmy Reed was from Dunleith, and of course he had a fascinating story. And there is not a blues or a rock band on planet Earth that does not or did not have a Jimmy Reed song in their set list. And you just named a bunch of them, famous ones, the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton. They revered Jimmy Reed, and he was from right here, It's
so much history. I think the blues trail, it was genius. And as you mentioned Craig Ray, but he often refers to it as the largest open air museum in America. But it's true. I mean, listen, one of the farms that I'm involved with is in Itabena. And as you know, on the outskirts of Itabena is where B.B. King's birthplace was. And we were, rounding that corner out in the middle of nowhere one day and saw the blues sign. I said, my goodness, man, because I'd read about the community, the old community he was from.
Right.
But so, I mean, what a great way to bring people into the Delta. What a great way to have them take that drive down Money Road. And it could, man, I tell you, again, you see it. You see, rental cars from God knows where out in the middle of nowhere on a regular basis. And people say, well, I wonder what they're doing here. I'll tell you what they're doing here. They're doing the Blues Trail, man. We have found a way to magically inject people from all over the world into the heartland of Mississippi. I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it?
It is brilliant. And of course, now they are, all over the country, some of them overseas. In 2019, right before COVID, myself, Steve, Craig Ray, Kamel, a number of us were in Liverpool. Mm-hmm. Dedication of the Mississippi Blues Trail marker there, and there's generally more to it than just the music history. Like the connection between Mississippi or the South and Liverpool it's deeper than the Beatles liked blues music or music out of Chicago that originated from here. Paul McCartney's father was a cotton broker in Liverpool. Liverpool was a cotton port, an international port. A lot of the world's economy was based on cotton coming out of the South. There are deep and interwoven ties between all of this history, and music just runs through it. That's what's fun when you get into it.
Yeah, I read what you wrote about Vivian Carter, and the irony of Gary, Indiana, is that I used to be involved in corporate initiatives for Knight Ridder that actually owned the newspaper in Gary, Indiana, and I spent time there. Wow. And got to know that place as it was, it was having very significant economic challenges. But, hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Wesley Smith. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're talking about the Mississippi Delta with my friend Wesley Smith. And, Wesley, you say you grew up in Greenwood. I have spent a tremendous amount of time in Greenwood over the last 20 years. As I mentioned, I hunt in Mentor City in Itta-Bena, then up in Mentor City. And then we have a place down in Chula as well. So we kind of cover the waterfront. The base station's right outside of Greenwood. But I have literally fallen in love with that place and can't get enough time there. I enjoy time in the outdoors, but the draw to me is the people and the close relationship I have with the farming family that I lease land from, and the other friends that I have gained since I've been there. Lee Abraham once said to me about the Mississippi Delta is that it never got out of the Depression. I mean, just never got out of the Depression. And until we as a state understand that, and until we can sort of lift the tide of the Mississippi Delta, Mississippi's never going to rank where it needs to rank. It's just kind of the reality. There are ways for us to fix that. Certainly tourism has a role in that. But I bet it's something you think about a lot.
I think about it constantly. I wish I had a coherent, great encapsulation of an idea to give you. I don't. And I know a lot of people think about it. I do think we should work together. I heard you use the term, you've used the term on your show before, co-opetition. Am I saying it right? Yeah. For the way the coast has come together?
Yeah.
And I would like to see the Delta do more of that. And you see it. But, if you could sound the emergency bells, they should have been ringing for at least 2 censuses.
Yeah.
So I do think we should kick it into another gear.
There seems to be opportunity there, but it will take. I had the opportunity to help Governor Barber after Hurricane Katrina form the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal after Katrina. I had the honor of writing the foreword to his book, America's Great Storm. And the book really details the unbelievable effort that we put in place to manage the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that occurred after the storm, because a lot of people were worried we would even be able to rebuild. Would casinos rebuild? Would we be able to invest back hundreds of millions of dollars that it was going to take, billions of dollars that it was going to take to fix coastal Mississippi and make it more resilient? But one of the things I learned going through that process at the time I was publisher of the Sun Herald, one of the things I learned about going through that process is that when there is someone once said there's a powerful lubrication to change that comes from pain. And the pain of Hurricane Katrina was so significant. It aligned us in ways, aligned competing communities in ways we could have never hoped for. We formed the Gulf Coast Business Council. We created the Knight Center, which is where most of the nonprofits of coastal Mississippi are housed now, and so on and so on and so on. There's so much aligning that occurred, and we really established, how we were going to think about our future in ways that we would have never been able to do if it weren't for Hurricane Katrina. In some respects, it's like a Hurricane Katrina has hit the Delta. It's an economic challenge. And it seems that the same kind of response needs to occur. And it's really probably the only way that would ever occur in such a massive way it would have to be Governor Reeves or a governor at some point just saying, you know what, we're going to take a different approach to this. We're going to think about the Delta strategically in ways we've never done before. And we're going to bring a wide coalition of people geographically and otherwise together in a setup very much like we did after Hurricane Katrina, and break it all down and say, okay, where are the opportunities, where are the threats, and how can we change the trajectory? I think that will have to happen at some point in the future, and I'm not sure what it is that's going to cause that, other than leadership. Yeah,
I was just thinking. You make a great point. In the Delta, Katrina's an emergency boom, all hands on deck. We know the Delta. It's been happening in slow motion for years. So it's almost the lobster in the pot with the water starting to boil. And how do you get everyone to pay attention? But I couldn't agree with you more. As a Mississippi, and not just as a Mississippi Delta, if I lived in another part of the state, I would be thinking about, as the Delta continues to slide, it just creates more problems for the state. And the longer and this is not to say, but all kind of people are doing all kind of work and putting thought into this, and how do we help it? It's a tough problem.
It is.
But if we don't get after it in another gear, the Delta economically will unfortunately drag the whole state down even further. So we need to find that fifth gear and get after it. Let me say something positive on the end of that. You talk about change. You have these big events that happen like Katrina. A lot of if we did this again, over time, I could convince you that not only is Mississippi the birthplace of America's music, it's the birthplace of modern pop culture. Okay, and pop culture, whether we like it or not, is the culture of youth. Now, you have from your teenage and early adult days, you have the pop culture of that time. Mine's probably slightly later. And this informs our opinions on everything throughout our life. It affects our politics. It affects the economy, how we view things. And this continuously churns. Well, the great migration of African Americans out of the South is what created the boom of music all over the country that changed the world. So we know these things, great change can come, and Mississippi has been the origin of a lot of it. And I don't know how I bring that back around to how we rescue the Delta and get it economically back on its feet. But I do think about these. Hey, it's happened here. Where it's happened, it can happen again. And we are in huge changes right now globally. We still don't know how COVID has affected us or what the ripple effects of that's affecting our politics and all of these things. So there's always hope. And again, we live in one of the most magical places on planet Earth, and people want to come see us. Anything can happen, So you just got to keep hope, keep working at it, and see where it goes.
If we don't focus on it, and we'll end on this and move on to talking more about the rest of your story. But if we don't focus on it, then things like healthcare, which are a current significant challenge, because not only changes in the way healthcare is provided, but also the financial problems that come with a declining population, et cetera. And the challenges that come with having a mostly poor population. These things are just challenges we will always face, but it won't get easier. It's going to get harder.
Right.
What I think you mentioned COVID. I think COVID did introduce us to the reality that remote work and things like that are kind of part of the reality. And one of the things that we also learned is that people tend now these days to want to move toward a town they want to live in. And your point that you're making, Delta's got some wonderful places. And so what a great way to be able to kill two birds with one stone and live in a wonderful place and also work remotely, especially if you're in the technology sector. And the technology jobs aren't going down in Mississippi, man. We're going to be hiring thousands and thousands into the future. So there are opportunities, but it's going to take really concentrated focus in ways that we haven't before. And I hope that we'll get there at some point. So You grew up in Greenwood, and where did you go from there?
Well, I grew up there. I was going to ask you, I'm sure you've eaten in Gardenias.
Many times. Love it.
Well, my dad had a running joke. Gardenias, before Fred Carl and Viking bought the Hotel Irving and turned it into the Alluvian, that where Gardenias was a ladies' department store called DeLoach's. My middle name is DeLoach. My great-grandfather started that store there in 1932. So I kind of grew up in a retail family there. My father was mayor of Greenwood for a number of years, but I got out of high school, went off to Ole Miss, studied history, and then when I got out, I was one of those guys who had no idea what I wanted to do. Worked a number of different jobs, totally different. You couldn't have found a thread of anything I was trying to do. Everything was just trying to hang together. I was a working musician through most of my 20s, and then it wasn't until I always had this interest in music. I'd always worked on festivals and events, but I lived in 3 or 4 states. It wasn't until I got to Memphis till I kind of stumbled into, I think this is what I want to do, music and tourism and production, that sort of thing. I love doing production. There's nothing more fun than throwing a party at some level, and you get that instant, not instant. What I like about Ricky is there is a start and a finish, and when you get to the finish, if you have success, you get that feeling of we pulled that off, let's do it again, and that can get sort of addictive. So that's a fun thing. These events we do in town, festivals, the things we do for Viking, you constantly get that dose of, man, we did that and that was awesome. Let's do it. Let's do it better. Well,
listen, you'd be interested. Speaking of Katrina, and we'll move to the next segment here after this. But I met Fred Carl. He worked out of my conference room often because he was a volunteer on the Katrina effort. He introduced me to Frank LaFleur and Lee Abraham and several other people in town, the Dunn family.
Yep.
And the rest is kind of history. But it's amazing how many dots connect, man. It's a small world at the end of the day. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Wesley Smith. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. As usually is the case, you never know where these conversations are going to go. And Wesley Smith from Greenville has had so much experience thinking about the Mississippi Delta, the music scene, and so on. I've just enjoyed some of these side tracks that we've gone down as we've had these conversations. And of course, always is the case, we get involved in significant discussions during the breaks, which I wish we'd just go ahead and record. If we could play that as a future show, it's a passionate discussion about the future of the Mississippi Delta. You just never know where these kind of conversations are going to go. And I'll have Wesley back because, as I mentioned to him, the reason for having these conversations is to sort of help people not take that area for granted, or the historic contributions, cultural contributions this had to the world, literally the world, and to maybe get you, instead of maybe going to Montana next time, maybe you go to the Mississippi Delta and do a vacation inside the state and take in what Craig Ray said is the largest open air museum in the United States. So, great conversation. Hey, listen, Wesley, of course, Steve and I have had great conversations about his in-residence gig that he's doing as part of Viking Cruise. But what you guys have developed there is really special, man. Steve has said, Ricky, you got to come up here. And eventually I'm going to get up there. What I'm going to do is hopefully it will time with one of my trips to the Delta where I can just drive over. But I want to see it. He's proud of it. I know you're proud of it. But it's making a big impact, isn't it?
it's making. It's funny, we've been working on the kind of the economic impact. Rough numbers, they've been coming a year and a half. We've had 53 shows for them, and it's somewhere between a $7 and a $10 million impact just on 53 visits. So, and their long-term plan is to build more ships, and ultimately it'll turn into full-time jobs. But the greatest thing, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is to watch again people who had no idea what Mississippi was, but besides bad headlines they had read, for a number of years, depending on how. And I mean, I've got videos of I'll send you one when we get done. I've got videos of people crying. You know what I mean? And they will espouse that they had no idea how important Mississippi was to the history of the country, how important it was to the history of music and things they love. Steve's the perfect guy to do this. His music and his connection to the Delta and Mississippi and his love for it. But the show is also. This is the best thing about it. They gave us an opportunity to put all of our culture into a show, to bring it under one roof. So Chef David Cruz comes. We feed them Delta hot tamales and fried catfish, and it is our food. And then we tell them our stories. There's a history section. Hank Burdine, who I'm sure you knew Hank over the years. Fortunately, we lost him last year. He did a history segment. He just told stories of the Delta. Now his son Matthew and I split that time, and they love that. They have no idea about Jim Henson and the creation of the Muppets, or Muddy Waters and the connection to the Rolling Stones, or why they had a teddy bear on their bed as kids. And when we tell that story, that's less than 60 miles of things that happened along Deer Creek in the Mississippi Delta. You know what I mean? And Ricky, I could do that. I could do it probably offhand pretty well for the Delta, but I could do this if you gave me 2 days, I could do this for any road, river, or stream in Mississippi. I could fascinate you with the history around it. That's how rich our history is.
It's incredible. What a great opportunity. And look, you took the words right out of my mouth, Wesley, but Steve Azar is literally the perfect ambassador for that. I mean, he really is. Not just his passion for Mississippi, but Steve is, in spite of his success and what he's doing these days, he doesn't take himself too seriously. He can. I bet his ability to stay enthusiastic for each and every one of those 50+ shows is something to watch. It doesn't get old to him. He appreciates what he has this opportunity to do.
Steve appreciates everything that's ever happened to his. I think that's one of the reasons he's had so much success in his life, is his mindset is conducive to this. He takes nothing for granted. And he doesn't talk about all these things, but I'll talk about them a little bit. His religious faith is strong. I mean, he's at the Catholic Church for Mass, much more than I'm at the Episcopal Church, I hate to say, but he is thankful in every way for everything that comes his way, and he doesn't take anything for granted. And we're just so lucky that he moved back and cares the way he does. He'll hear this and kind of pick on me, but it's just the truth. He has the Delta Soul Celebrity Golf Tournament. It's raised well over $1 million. It goes right back into, we talk about the kids don't have arts training. All this stuff just piles back in, and it is an ultimate good for everything.
And he travels all over the world telling our story. And when he does collaborations with Cedric Bartonside doing songs like Cold Water and others, I think some of his best music is still ahead of him. That's what I say to him all the time. Right. I really think some of his best music is ahead of him. But I'm thrilled, and I know you are, to be able to say that he's a friend. Hey, we're out of time, Wesley, but it's been a terrific opportunity to visit with you, my friend.
I loved it. Let's do it again. Come to the Delta.
I will. This has been Wesley Smith from the Mississippi Delta. Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.